please do get in touch if that's an issue. Otherwise, over to Jeremy. So Jeremy Swist is a lecturer in the Department of Classical Studies at Brandeis University. He's previously taught at Miami University and Xavier University. He earned his PhD in classics from the University of Iowa in 2018 with a dissertation entitled A Principio Reges, the reception of the Seven Kings of Rome in imperial historiography from Tiberius to Theodosius. He's published on the sophists Libanius and Himerus, the historian Florus, the medical writer Celsus, and the emperor Julian. He also researches the reception of Greece, Rome, and Byzantium in heavy metal, and has a chapter on Sparta in the forthcoming Cambridge Companion to Metal Music. So thank you very much, Jeremy. Over to you.
All right. Thanks, Ben, and thanks, Nicola, as well, for organizing this and inviting me here and welcoming me. So I guess I'll get started. So my title doesn't have the magic words ambiguity or ambivalence, but I think in the word allegory, that might intimate that there's at least ambiguity that will be explored in this talk. So I'll call your attention first to the image on the right. So those of you around London, I believe this is in the Hampton Court Palace at the King's Staircase, and it's a giant mural around the room depicting the myth that Julian writes, which is now known as the Caesars or the Symposium, and so that is the god Hermes essentially dictating the story to Julian, who's writing it down. So, which is sort of the kind of the theme of what we're going with here. As mentioned by Matt earlier, I'm used to reading from a script at an in-person talk, and so I pre-circulated the paper this time, and so I'm just giving it a shot, sort of just speaking off the cuff with a PowerPoint. So if I am starting to go over time, Ben or Nicola, just tell me to shut up, and I'll skip to my final slide. Okay. So let's get going. So just a quick context, the timeline of events that are relevant here. So Julian was born to Constantine's half-brother, making Constantine his uncle in 331. And when he was about 6 years old is when Constantine died, and his three sons succeeded him. And it's not clear who ordered the death of most of Julian's family at this point, including Julian's father, who were descended from Constantius I's wife Theodora rather than Helena. But Julian certainly pins the blame squarely on Constantius for that. By 351, Julian, in his education, this is the date where he claims to have apostatized in secret from the Arian Christianity he was raised on, and became not only a Hellenic pagan, but specifically subscribing to the theurgic ritualistic blend of Neoplatonism that was theorized by the philosopher Iamblichus, with whose students he had been studying in Pergamum. By 355, Constantius had gotten Gallus out of the way and appointed Julian Caesar in Gaul to take care of affairs there. And it was about that time that Julian composed the letter to Themistius. Some people think it was written in 361 when Julian became Augustus, but I side with the people who date it to 355, and I can point you to the scholarship there. In 360, Julian is in Paris, and at least the official version is his troops proclaim him Augustus against Constantius's wishes in 360. And so Julian upgrades and puts out coins reflecting that upgrade with a nice beard and diadem. Looks much better that way. In November 361, they were on a path to civil war, but the animator died of a sudden heart attack, and Constantius dropped dead. Julian succeeds as legitimate heir to the Constantinian dynasty. And then in 361, he's in Constantinople, establishing his power, getting his court organized, and I side with scholars like David Greenwood and others who argue that the Caesars, which I mentioned at the start, was actually written at the during the Saturnalia of 361 rather than 362 in Antioch. And I think it makes much better sense that way. And then in March 362 is when he composed his tirade, let's call it, against the Cynic Heraclius, Oration 7, which contains his autobiographical myth, which is the other one, main one I'll be talking about today. And then in December 362, he writes the hymn to King Helios, and he's in Antioch at that point. And in 363 in June is when he takes a spear to the liver during an ambush by the Persians on a retreat back from an abortive campaign in Persia, and Jovian succeeds, and that's and it's Christian emperors from that point on. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'll be talking about two original myths, let's call them, that Julian has written that we have, and the first one that he wrote, I'd argue, in December 361 is a satire / Platonic dialogue, if you will, called the Caesars or the Symposium. And this is essentially, a wonderful tale of the god Hermes, showing up and saying to Julian, "I'm going to tell you about this banquet of the gods, that's had on Olympus or in the heavens, in which the deified emperors of Rome, all the way from Julius Caesar up to the sons of Constantine, come to join the party, and the gods decide to hold a contest over who was the best ruler among these people." So I've been working with this text a lot. I'm currently teaching a graduate seminar on it. We're having a lot of fun with it. But the main myth I'm going to really talk about today will be the one he wrote a few months later, which is contained within his Oration 7 to the Cynic Heraclius. Okay. Basically, this was occasioned by a Cynic philosopher, Heraclius, coming to Constantinople and giving a public lecture in which he used a myth that was a thinly veiled allegory, where essentially Heraclius set himself up as Zeus and Julian as Pan, and he was kind of talking down to him, and this being a classic use of Cynic parousia, speaking truth to power, and Julian didn't have a problem with that. The problem Julian had with Heraclius using this kind of myth making was this didn't follow the rules of mythography that Julian lays down in this speech. And Julian believes that if you have to make a myth yourself, then they have to be respectful of the gods. And clearly, to Julian, Heraclius, being Zeus and Julian being Pan is an insult, not to Julian, but to Pan and to Zeus for that matter. Okay? So that's wrong. And as for the traditional myths where you have stuff from Hesiod and Homer where the gods are doing all of these immoral things, well, these are what Julian would call incongruous in thought. Because to Julian, he has a very idealized theology where the gods are all holy, perfect, beings without any sort of human flaws or limitations. And so anything in myths that seem to kind of suggest that kind of anthropomorphization should be interpreted allegorically to reveal deeper theological truths. Okay, so Julian basically says that you should only write a myth if you're making a point about theology, okay, possibly ethics, which Heraclius is clearly not doing. So, only like Platonists basically should be doing this, and Cynics, can, stay in their own lane. Okay, and so Julian kind of lays out these rules for how to not only construct a proper myth, but also how to interpret it allegorically. Okay, and then Julian presents his own myth, original myth, which is pretty much everyone reads as autobiographical. Okay, just a quick summary of that myth. Those are the Stephanus pages for that. So essentially, the myth starts with a rich man who has this large estate that he bequeaths to his uneducated sons. And because they're uneducated, they don't know how to manage the state estate properly, and they turn on each other because all they care about is acquiring wealth. And so the estate is mismanaged and becomes covered in darkness, and it's chaos and confusion. And as the image suggests, this is basically, these are stand-ins for Constantine and his sons. Sorry, Nicola, but we know Julian's opinion of these people. So Zeus takes a look at all this and takes pity on the situation, and especially on the cousin of these sons, which of course is Julian here. And Zeus commands his son Helios to take care of his own offspring rather than abandon their household. So in other words, Helios is set up as a son of Zeus in this, and saying that this young man or boy in this myth is Helios's own offspring, and that Helios has a commitment to the household of this family, and this can be easily connected to the Constantinians family's connection to solar worship, the cult of Sol Invictus, before Constantine's conversion, and then retroactively going back to Claudius II, right? So Helios essentially sends Hermes to lead this young man to a mountain, into the desert, to a mountain, and then at the top of the mountain, he has a vision of Helios as well as Athena, who are presented as the boy's true father and mother. And they command him essentially to follow the gods and then go back down the mountain, take over the estate, purify it. And then if he does all these things, then he'll be able to come back up there and essentially be a god in his own right, and join in on their, godly activities. So that's the myth in a nutshell. Some key passages here for kind of the interpretation that I and many others have kind of fixated on. So at 228d, here's the bit where Zeus is talking to Helios and calls him his child and his offshoot, using the word blastema, among the gods more ancient than heaven and earth. And right away, you can see this is a theology that is quite different than what we would get in Hesiod's Theogony, so that should tell us that we're working with a different tradition here. And then Zeus tells Helios, points out the boy on Earth, the cousin, and says, "This little child is your offspring, your own offspring, son ekgonon." So we have two words, blastema and ekgonos, for refer to this offspring, this offshoot. Later on, Athena addresses what's essentially Julian, also calls Julian the offshoot of her as well as of Helios. So there's an interesting parallel there. And then at the very end, Helios addresses Julian, calls him our offspring, our ekgonos, and that he was essentially sent into incarnation for a public service, a leiturgia, some sort of mission, and that essentially, if you fulfill this mission by following us, you'll be a god, and together with us, you will behold our Father. And that's essentially some hinting towards some sort of apotheosis at the end there. So various scholars have their own takes on this myth. It's an allegory, and so when somebody says this is an allegory, then kind of all hell breaks loose as to what the actual meaning is. So what I'll first point out is Polymnia Athanasiadi, in her book Julian and Hellenism, connected this myth to how Julian writes about the god Romulus, Quirinus, in the hymn to Helios, as being of a very similar trajectory, and then declares essentially that Romulus's career is autobiographical of Julian in light of the myth. So here, essentially, Julian is putting himself on the same level as the god Romulus, founding Rome, ascending to heaven as Quirinus. And then later, Susanna Elm, in her book Sons of Hellenism, Fathers of the Church, has her interpretation of this, where she's kind of reads this to mean that Julian is telling us to read the literal level and the allegorical level of this. Is the literal level is that he is the son of, or he is a member of the Flavian dynasty, but in truth, he's the offspring of Zeus and Helios. Okay, so we'll talk about that. Elm also mentions elsewhere in the book that Julian is essentially, his relationship to Helios is essentially how Constantine, before his conversion, styled it, which was Sol Invictus Comes Augusti. Okay, so the unconquered son, the companion of Augustus. Okay. And then the most recent kind of take on this is by David Neil Greenwood in his brand new book, Julian and Christianity, revisiting the Constantinian Revolution. And in part of that book, he shows that earlier in Oration 7, Julian presents Heraclius as a proto-Christ, saying that, when he voyaged across the Mediterranean in a golden cup from Helios, he actually walked on water, and so that's probably rivaling Christ in that regard, and that essentially Greenwood interprets the autobiographical myth by essentially doing, A is like B, therefore, and B is like C, and therefore A is like C. So the autobiographical myth presents Julian as new Heracles because it has elements of the choice of Heracles from Prodicus in it, but there are clear parallels between Julian in that myth and Christ's temptation in the desert by Satan in Matthew's Gospel. And so Greenwood concludes that Julian is consciously rivaling Jesus Christ himself as a self-styled God and Son of God through these biblical intertexts here. Okay. So that's sort of what some people have said. And so my own take on this is, well, Julian clearly, as I see it, wants us to read this myth neoplatonically, rather than through any sort of Christianizing lens, though those other lenses, as I'll conclude at the end, are available and would not have been unwelcome. But in terms of how Julian would have understood it, I think this is the way we should go. So the first thing, real quick, I won't dive into, the nitty-gritty of Neoplatonic theology and metaphysics here, but, as for, Helios being the son of Zeus, I believe what's going on here is that the Helios is the kind of what he would call Helios Basileus, as he addressed him in the hymn, who is essentially the nexus within essentially the realm of true reality, which is divided into the intelligible realm, which is the realm of the forms in Plato, and the intellectual cosmos, the Noeric realm, where the gods are essentially active principles that are demiurgic and that they initiate causality in the sensible world below it. However, in Neoplatonism, this intelligible cosmos, this realm of nous intellect, comes into being through the act of self-contemplation of the first principle, which is the one, or Plato's good, which exists beyond being. All being is predicated upon it, and so its act of contemplating itself necessarily creates this dyad and brings the realm of intellect into being, and that the visible sun further down from there is essentially the manifestation of all of this in the sensible, visible cosmos, and that what Julian is doing, he's kind of putting himself on a direct line here where in the world itself, the Roman Empire is the world, and the Roman Emperor functions for planet Earth as the sun does in the visible cosmos, as the god Helios does in the ideal world, etc. And so what seems to be going on in specifically Oration 7 is that Julian is sort of rearranging kind of who he calls what. So it seems that the middle Helios here is the son of Zeus, who is the first principle here, who he otherwise sometimes identifies with Kronos in the Caesars, arguably. So essentially we have Zeus at the top level, Helios at the middle level, and then Julian has the same parallel relationship below that. Okay, so that's one thing, and again, the paper has more evidence for that. So let's talk about now Julian's own self-fashioning here. Okay, so and this I refer to Julian's letter to Themistius. Okay, and this was written back in 355, and people like Greenwood kind of dismiss it, saying this is Julian sort of having imposter syndrome when he was first elevated to Caesar, and this doesn't really reflect what he later thought about himself. But essentially, he tells Themistius, who said, "Oh, you're going to be a philosopher king. You'll be, the empsuchos nomos. You'll be the installment of the law." Okay, and Julian was like, "No. I'm just a regular human being. I'm not like Heraclius or Dionysus, who are superior ontologically. They were the true philosopher kings. I'm not like any of that." But since we're talking about proper kingship, yes, if somebody has to be a ruler, if they're human by nature, they at least should try to imitate, these deities or imitate the gods and function on Earth as the gods do for the benefit of the cosmos. And so he says, by choice, they need to be like a daimon, or like a hero, like a god. Okay, and that word proairesis comes up again and again. Is this choice to become like the gods? Is essential to proper rulership. Okay, okay, that wasn't somebody telling me to be quiet. All right, and just real quick. So what do we mean by daimons and angels, heroes, demons? So Julian, again, is subscribing to the Neoplatonic kind of hierarchy of being of the philosopher Iamblichus, who essentially kind of integrates all sorts of pagan theology into a metaphysical philosophical system. And so essentially every soul, if we start at soul at the bottom, is connected to a specific leader god through intermediary beings, angels, daimons or demons, and heroes. Okay, and so Julian is essentially asserting that he is just a soul. Okay, he's just a regular human being like everyone else, and that he's not like Heracles, who's a hero, or Dionysus, who's a daimon, as he would argue, and he's certainly not like a god. Okay, gods, if you read John Finnemore, you'll see that gods and not even daimons, descend into matter through, conventional means of incarnation. Okay, heroes, there's some ambiguity there, but I won't get into that too much. Okay, so let's think a bit more about just the kind of the background to the concept of leader gods, because essentially what I'm arguing is that Helios is Julian's leader god, who is up the chain of being command from him, and that Julian's soul essentially is caused to descend into generation by him. Okay, so this concept of leader gods comes from Plato's Phaedrus, the idea that from the chariot allegory, where various gods are riding the chariots across the heavens, and they're leading essentially the souls that are trying to follow them, and that if souls become successful followers of any god, they have a good life because they're able to essentially ascend to behold true reality. Okay, escape from the cave, all that stuff. And just notice the language being here. The word for follower is sun opados. Okay, and so the Neoplatonists, especially Iamblichus, kind of eat this all up and say that various people, were descended from various leader gods, such as the philosopher Pythagoras descended from his leader god Apollo. And this is how he interprets essentially the notion that Pythagoras was actually a son of Apollo. Iamblichus says, no, that's just a way of saying that his soul descended from the chain of Apollo as the leader god, and he was a follower, a synopodon, okay, just like in the chariot allegory. For Julian, this becomes quite clear in a couple places. First off, in the Caesars, at the very end, Hermes essentially tells all the emperors who took part in the contest, yes, Marcus Aurelius won for being the best emperor because he's a philosopher, but you all get participation trophies. You all get to go hang out with your your own leader gods based on the lives that you lived. Okay, and so Julius Caesar goes to Aphrodite. Okay, Augustus goes to Apollo. Trajan goes to Alexander, etc. Okay, and they have this choice of which leader god to follow and to imitate based on the life they led to be their champion and their leader. So again, there's consistency of language here with that. So this brings up, again, Julian's idea of the relationship between his metaphysics and kind of the deification of Roman emperors and how Roman emperors fit into this kind of theological system. And I think a good thing to kind of bring into this, and this relates to Julian's kind of mission as a Roman emperor assigned to him by Helios and the gods, is there's a fragment from the Against the Galileans, where he basically says that if someone is naturally fit, gets good paideia by reading the Greek classics, which for him means committing to Greek religion, okay, and not just literature, they in fact become a gift of the gods. Okay, and they do all sorts of things like they promote science, they found constitutions, they're victorious in war, they travel a lot, and they prove themselves to be heroikos. They prove themselves to be hero-like, heroic. Okay? And so, in other words, if they choose to do all of these things, they reveal what had already been predetermined, that they had been sent by the gods to benefit the cosmos. Okay? And if we look at the Caesars, we see that Julian has kind of fits in this satire Roman emperors ascending to the gods, and they are referred to as heroes in the text a couple times. And so I read this as sort of an allegory for again, they functioned like heroes, even though they were not ontologically heroes in his scheme. But that's something I'm still sort of playing with, because that is ambiguous, which I suppose is fitting here. But there's other evidence here that essentially Julian, while playing with this whole idea of imperial deification, ultimately rejects the notion that the Roman Senate or any particular emperor can deify someone and they just become a god. Okay, so in 311, Silenus, who's sort of the joker of the Socrates of the dialogue, looks at Hadrian and sees Hadrian, oh, you're looking for Antinous. Well, he's not here because you can't just deify people, anyone you want. And he has a similar critique of Augustus, calling him a doll maker, saying that no, only the gods can do this because they can do anything. Augustus you can't just deify people. But on the other hand, we have various language throughout the dialogue where Zeus says, send in this emperor, or I'm going to bring in these emperors to kind of fix the situation. So in 311b, Silenus says to Zeus, that's not fair that Titus ruled, a couple years and then Domitian ruled 15. And then Zeus says, don't worry, I will introduce many good emperors, the 5 good emperors. And there's a few other things like that. So we have this notion that, not only are these emperors ascending as heroes to the gods, but they are, at least some of them are being specifically sent by the gods originally. Okay, so Julian is sort of collapsing time here. Okay, and I will jump ahead toward the conclusion. So yeah, Julian essentially argues in the Hymn to Helios that where he says essentially he is not unique. Helios is the common father of all humankind. Okay, so all souls descend from Helios. And that basically souls reveal the purpose for which the gods chose them by the lives they choose. So we see this pro-iresis a lot. And then Julian concludes that, again, his purpose, he was sent to be an opados, a follower of Helios, and he was specifically generated and made to descend into matter for the express purpose of benefiting the human race and especially the Roman Empire. Okay, so there is that political connection there. Okay, so here's my conclusion. So again, thanks for your patience. Okay, so again, Julian, I say, philosophically rejects that he is himself any sort of superior being. He's no literal son of God. He is the son of Helios as much as anyone else is, because Helios is the source of all souls. Okay? And he doesn't think that he himself is a god or will become a god. Okay? And so he rejects the whole notion of imperial deification. Okay? What he really believed is that his soul, like those of previous emperors, okay, descended from a leader god, in his case Helios, and that by choosing to imitate Helios, he would fulfill the heroic mission of refounding the Roman Empire. Okay? And here's where I really connect this with Dilyana Angelova's kind of theory of this ideology of imperial refoundation, where, emperors wanted to style themselves as a new Romulus, a new Augustus, someone who would found the city anew, found the empire anew, and of course Julian's program of pagan restoration certainly, I would argue, plays into that. Okay? However, and this kind of brings in the theme of the conference, not everyone is going to read these myths, with the context of Neoplatonic or Iamblichus Neoplatonic metaphysics, and so some people are going to read these myths a bit more literally to say that, well, maybe Julian is some sort of, son of God who was sent to save the world, and that he will reascend as a god, just like Romulus, just like Heraclius, just like Jesus Christ. And of course, this is not anything particularly new. He is also playing with, kind of the divine right, that it was formulated by Diocletian and the Tetrarchy, and of course, emperors before them certainly thought that they had particular divine champions, if not divine fathers, that they sort of, put out. But I will end there. So thank you very much for your patience, and I welcome your questions.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Do we have questions or comments? Raising hands, as usual, if you'd like to start. If not, I'd just like to ask quick about this whole theme of imperial divinities, something I'm quite interested in, because it's quite messy in the 4th century, and there seems to be no particular sort of structure to it, and I just and so it's something that fits quite uncomfortably, you would think, in a Christian worldview, but it remains in the panegyrics of this period, and of course in the the imperial cult goes on in some form or another, which is where do you think do you think where do you think Julian fits in that kind of wider landscape?
I mean, Julian, was essentially seeing kind of the diversity and the totality of, civic cults and kind of what he would call kind of ethnic or national cults as all, comprising a unity. Okay, they are all worshiping, the higher divinities and divinity, in their own way. And so I think he would see the imperial cult as, as part of that. He was a henotheist, so he thought that, yes, there was a single grand divinity, Helios, but, all the gods and various, however you call them in their various traditions, were aspects, emanations, manifestations thereof. And he thought of himself as essentially, an emanation thereof as well, and that... and so I think the imperial cult, however it was run, to whatever degree that it imbued the emperor with divinity, was certainly something that he could easily integrate into this, and that he would have no problem with. Again, I think he is perfectly comfortable with the notion that people are worshiping him as some form of divinity, whether a hero or a god or whatever, going back to the Hellenistic, monarchies and whatnot. And certainly people, and certainly other people at the time, in the panegyrics, Libanius and others are certainly playing on this notion as well, and reading, perhaps reading these myths that way. Okay, so I think his critique of deification and the imperial cult in the Caesars is he's essentially saying, no, the Roman Senate is, not the ones who authorize, the deification. It's really the gods. Okay, did these emperors serve the gods well and fulfill their purpose and choose the proper life such that they could reascend, having successfully completed that mission? And not all emperors do. So, Commodus, Caligula, Nero, they fail to do this, and so they, in fact, fall to earth or fall to the underworld, which is actually, also alluding to the unsuccessful charioteers in the Phaedrus. Okay, so, and again here, I think that Alan Ross brought this up at a previous presentation. This could be a dig at the Roman Senate. How he's presenting the Caesars, which is a body that Julian, probably didn't get along with because they were staunchly on Constantius's side and seem to have not, they seem to have stuck with him, with Constantius, when Julian, declared civil war, essentially.
Thank you. No, that's very clear. Thank you. Just time for one more question. Sorry, Nicola. That is going to go to Peter, who isn't able to speak to us at the moment, but has put it on the chat. So you mentioned a little bit. Could you elaborate on what, if any, Christian influences you do see in Julian's mythology?
Okay. So David Greenwood's book convincingly argues that Julian is definitely alluding to the temptation in the desert in the Gospel of Matthew, in his own autobiographical myth. Okay, and so I think, and for what purpose? Julian, is clearly probably, trying to rival Christ, or at least, and also by comparing, saying that Heraclius had Christ-like figures, was basically trying to say that Christianity was, trying to be a ripoff of, pagan theology that had already been established in the mythology here, and that he himself, Julian, was, was somebody who was actually kind of recapitulating, this kind of Christ-like career himself, and there are other thoughts that and what Greenwood would go on to argue is that, which I disagree with, is that, Julian's original Christianity and tradition that he was grown up with, fundamentally shaped his view of paganism, and Hellenic polytheism, which and sort of dismisses a lot of kind of the Neoplatonic philosophical kind of stuff there. However, it is interesting to note, and this is pointed out, that the Neoplatonic system, of kind of the hierarchy of hypostases with the one and intellect and soul and all of that does sort of resemble kind of subordinationist Christology, rather than Nicene, and so that is certainly something that could be there. But it's really hard to kind of it's really hard. It's a really vexed question of what kind of commitment Julian had to Christianity in the first place, and what degree it influenced his own take on paganism, because clearly Julian was very well read in in the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament and other things. So yeah, it's not a question I can confidently address. So thanks. You're muted, Ben.
Yes, thank you. Thanks very much, Sherry. We'll now move on to our final paper of the session, which is from Julia Thomas. So Dr. Julia Thomas holds a BA in Ancient History and Archaeology and an MA in Classics and Ancient History from the University of Exeter,